The first time Alexander Romano looked at me like he already knew who I was, I thought I was imagining things. Men like him did not remember women like me. In his world, people like me were meant to blend into the background, to pass through grand rooms carrying silver trays, folding linens, and disappearing before anyone important noticed we were there. I was Emily Carter, a housemaid at the Romano estate, a place where every marble hallway, every locked door, and every quiet conversation seemed to belong to someone far more powerful than I could ever become. For 2 years, I had learned the rules of that house without anyone needing to explain them. Stay respectful. Stay invisible. Never ask questions that were not meant for you. Most importantly, never become part of the problems surrounding Alexander Romano, the man whose name carried enough influence to silence entire rooms before he ever entered them. I believed I understood my place until the night a private gathering at the estate revealed something that was never supposed to reach my ears. The rain had been falling against the tall windows for hours, turning the gardens outside into a blur of shadows and reflections, while inside, wealthy guests spoke in careful voices about secrets, debts, and promises that had been buried for years. I was only there because I was doing my job, walking through the main hall with a tray in my hands, trying to move quietly like I always had. I never intended to listen, but one sentence stopped me before I even realized I had heard it. Someone mentioned that the past had a way of returning when people least expected it, and although I did not understand what those words meant, I felt the strange certainty that they were connected to something far beyond my simple life at the estate. When I turned to leave, I noticed the conversations around me shifting. Faces that had ignored me countless times suddenly studied me with a kind of attention I had never wanted. It was not kindness. It was not respect. It was the uncomfortable look people gave when they wondered whether someone standing beside them knew too much. I lowered my eyes the way I had learned to do, preparing myself for the accusations and suspicion I had experienced before. But then Alexander Romano spoke from the top of the staircase, and the entire atmosphere changed without him needing to raise his voice. He did not defend me like a man protecting an employee. He spoke as if he was protecting someone whose existence carried a meaning even he had not fully understood until that moment. He said I had worked in his home for years, and that if I had wanted to betray the Romano family, I would have done it long before that night. No one argued with him, because Alexander was not a man people challenged easily. Yet when everyone finally left and the mansion returned to its usual silence, I expected him to question me, to demand answers, or to remind me of my place. Instead, he asked about the necklace I wore around my neck, the small piece of jewelry I had carried since childhood because it was the only thing my mother left behind. I had always believed it was just an old memory, something valuable only because of the person who gave it to me. But the way Alexander looked at it told me that I had been carrying something much more important than I ever realized. For the first time since I entered that mansion, the most powerful man in the city looked at me not as a servant, but as someone connected to a chapter of his own life that he thought had disappeared forever. He asked where I had gotten the necklace, and when I told him my mother gave it to me and warned me to keep it safe until someone understood its meaning, the expression on his face revealed something I had never seen before. It was not anger, suspicion, or control. It was recognition. I did not know why a simple necklace could bring back memories Alexander Romano had spent years trying to bury, and I did not know why the man everyone feared suddenly became the one person standing between me and a secret powerful enough to threaten his entire world. I only knew that the night he protected me was the same night I discovered I had never truly been a stranger to him. I just did not know it yet. I thought the necklace was just a memory from my childhood. I never imagined it was a piece of a story that someone had spent years trying to forget. After that night in Alexander Romano's office, everything around me felt different. The same mansion, the same long hallways, the same quiet mornings. But I no longer felt invisible. I felt watched. Not because people suddenly respected me, but because they wanted to understand why Alexander had protected me. The next morning, I returned to my usual duties. I prepared breakfast, organized the rooms, and followed the routine I had known for the past 2 years. But the atmosphere inside the mansion had changed. Employees who rarely spoke to me now looked at me with curiosity. Some wondered why Alexander had defended me. Others wondered what connection I could possibly have to his family. I ignored the whispers because I had learned something important in life. People often create stories about you before they ever ask for the truth. Later that afternoon, Alexander asked me to meet him in the private library. It was a room filled with old books, family photographs, and records that looked like they had been untouched for decades. He stood near a table covered with documents, holding a photograph in his hand. "Do you recognize this person?" he asked. I looked at the picture. It showed a young man standing beside Alexander's father. I had never seen the face before, but something about the photograph felt strangely familiar. "No," I answered honestly. Alexander studied my expression carefully. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I have no reason to lie to you." For a moment, he remained silent. Then he placed the photograph beside the necklace. The symbol on the necklace matched the symbol in the corner of the old picture. My heart started beating faster. "What does this mean?" I asked. Alexander looked at the items on the table. "That is what I am trying to understand." He explained that the symbol belonged to a small group of people who had once been connected to the Romano family. Years ago, his father had trusted someone outside the family with an important responsibility. But after his father's passing, many records disappeared. Certain names were removed. Certain stories were never completed. "And you think my family is connected to that?" I asked. Alexander looked at me. "I think your family may be the missing piece." I did not know how to respond. My entire life, I believed my family was ordinary. We had lived quietly. We worked hard. We never spoke about powerful people or hidden histories. My mother always told me that kindness was more valuable than status. Now I wondered if she had known more than she ever told me. Alexander noticed my silence. "I understand if this is too much," he said. His voice sounded different from the one I heard around other people. Less like a leader giving orders. More like a person searching for answers. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You could simply investigate without involving me." He looked toward the window. "Because someone already decided your life could be changed without your choice. I will not do the same." Those words surprised me. The man everyone described as distant and impossible to reach was showing a side nobody talked about. A side that cared about fairness. Before I left the library, Alexander gave me the photograph. "Keep this for now," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Because if your family was connected to mine, then this belongs to you too." That evening, I returned to my small room inside the mansion and looked at the necklace under the warm light. For years, I thought it represented where I came from. Now I wondered if it represented where I was going. The next morning, Alexander received information from his family archives. A document had been found with a name connected to the necklace. A name from his past. A name that changed the way he looked at everything. And when he told me who it belonged to, I realized my quiet life had never been as simple as I believed. I thought the name on the document would answer all my questions. Instead, it created even more. When Alexander showed me the name connected to the old records, I expected to feel surprised. I did not expect to feel like a forgotten part of my own family history had suddenly returned. The name was Clara Carter, my grandmother. I had heard stories about her when I was young, but only simple ones. My mother always described her as a kind woman who believed that helping others mattered more than gaining recognition. I never knew she had any connection to the Romano family. Alexander looked at me carefully as I processed the information. "Your grandmother worked with my father many years ago," he explained. "Not for him. With him." That difference mattered. It meant she was not simply someone who passed through his family's world. She was someone trusted enough to stand beside them. I looked at the old document again. The handwriting was familiar. It looked like the notes my mother kept in our home. Small details that I never thought were important suddenly felt meaningful. "Why did nobody tell me?" I asked. Alexander did not answer immediately. He looked through the records again, searching for an explanation. "Maybe they were trying to protect you," he finally said. I understood that possibility, but it did not make the silence easier. Secrets may begin with good intentions, but they can still create distance between people. Over the next few days, Alexander and I continued looking through the archives. He could have assigned someone else to help him, but he chose to work with me directly. At first, I thought it was because I was connected to the mystery. Then I realized something had changed. He was no longer investigating me. He was learning from me. I knew details about my grandmother that were not written in any document. I remembered the stories she told me, the small habits she had, and the values she passed down. Alexander had records of names and dates, but I had memories. Together, we started filling in the missing pieces. One evening, we found a letter hidden inside an old family book. It was written by my grandmother to Alexander's father. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me felt like I was entering a conversation that was never meant for me. But Alexander nodded. If it was left behind, there was probably a reason. The letter explained that Clara Carter had promised to protect something important. Not money, not property, something more personal. A promise between two families. She believed that one day someone would need to know the truth. I looked at Alexander. She knew this day would come. He read the letter again. Maybe she hoped it would. That thought stayed with me. My grandmother had lived a quiet life, but she had carried something meaningful. She had trusted that the right person would eventually discover the truth. Later that night, I walked through the mansion and noticed something I had never noticed before. The place was filled with portraits, memories, and stories. But behind all the beautiful rooms were unanswered questions. Alexander joined me in the hallway. "You seem different tonight," he said. I smiled slightly. "I am trying to understand how a person can live an ordinary life while being connected to something so much bigger." He looked at me. Maybe ordinary does not mean unimportant. I did not expect those words from him. For years, I had accepted that people would underestimate me because of my position and appearance. But Alexander was starting to see something I had slowly forgotten about myself. I had value before anyone discovered my connection to his family. The next morning, another piece of information arrived from the archives. A former advisor to the Romano family had requested access to the old records years ago. Someone who knew about the connection between our families. Someone who had reasons to keep the past hidden. Alexander looked at the name and became silent. I knew from his expression that this person was not just another part of the mystery. This was someone close. Someone who had been trusted. And suddenly, the secret was no longer only about our families. It was about the person who chose to hide the truth from both of us. I thought finding the person behind the hidden records would finally give us answers. Instead, it showed us how complicated the truth could become when it involved people you once trusted. The name on the document was Thomas Reed. He had been the Romano family's advisor for more than 20 years. He was not a stranger. He was someone who knew every important decision, every family tradition, and every secret that had been carefully protected. When Alexander saw his name, I noticed something change in his expression. It was not just disappointment. It was the feeling of someone realizing that the past was closer than he ever imagined. "Thomas was like family," Alexander said quietly. "We were sitting in the library, surrounded by old records and photographs. The same room where we had started searching for answers now felt completely different. It was no longer just a place filled with history. It was a place filled with questions. Do you believe he would hide something from your father?" I asked. Alexander looked at the documents on the table. "I want to say no, but I have learned that wanting something to be true does not make it true." His honesty surprised me. The man everyone believed was impossible to understand was finally allowing himself to question the things he had always accepted. We continued reviewing the records connected to Thomas. The more we discovered, the clearer one thing became. Thomas had not erased the connection between our families completely. He had hidden pieces of it, almost as if he wanted the truth to disappear, but not forever. Why would someone do that? I asked. Alexander thought for a moment. Maybe because they were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. I understood that feeling. Fear had controlled many decisions in my own family. My mother had kept quiet because she wanted to protect me. My grandmother had carried a promise because she believed someone would eventually need to know. But protection without honesty could become another kind of burden. That evening, Alexander asked me about my grandmother. He wanted to know every detail I remembered, not just the facts, the little things, the stories, the moments that documents could never capture. I told him about how Clara Carter always believed people showed their true character when nobody was watching. I told him how she would help neighbors quietly and never expect anything in return. Alexander listened carefully. "She sounds like someone my father respected," he said. I smiled. She probably respected him too. For the first time, we both laughed. It was a small moment, but it felt important. In a mansion filled with old secrets, two people from different worlds were finding a connection through simple memories. The next day, Thomas requested a meeting with Alexander. When I heard the news, I expected anger. Instead, Alexander remained calm. "Are you going to see him?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes." "Why?" I wondered. He looked at me. "Because if someone made a mistake, I want to understand why, not just what they did." That answer showed me how much he had changed. Before I met Alexander, I believed powerful people only cared about winning. But he was beginning to understand something different. The truth was not only about proving someone wrong. It was about understanding how people reached the choices they made. Later that afternoon, Alexander returned from the meeting with a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table without opening it. Thomas admitted he knew about our family's connection, he said. My heart became still. Then why hide it? Alexander looked at the envelope. Because he believed revealing the truth would change everything. I looked at him. Maybe it was supposed to change everything. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter written many years ago. A letter that mentioned my grandmother, Alexander's father, and one final promise they had made together. But before we could finish reading it, we noticed one sentence that changed the entire meaning of the discovery. The promise was not created to protect the past. It was created to protect someone in the future. Someone like me. And suddenly, I realized I was not just connected to Alexander's history. I was connected to the reason his family had been waiting all these years. I thought the promise hidden in that letter would explain why my family was connected to the Romano legacy. Instead, it revealed something much deeper. It showed me that my grandmother had not been protecting a secret because she was afraid. She had been protecting a choice that changed the lives of two families. Alexander and I sat together in the library, reading every word carefully. The letter was written by my grandmother, Clara Carter, and addressed to Alexander's father, Michael Romano. It described a moment years ago when both families faced a difficult decision. Michael wanted to create a future where trust mattered more than status. Clara believed the same thing. They agreed that their families should always remember one simple truth. Power meant nothing if it was not used with responsibility. I looked at Alexander after reading those words. Your father sounds different from what people told me, I said. Alexander looked down at the letter. Maybe people only remember the parts that benefit them. His answer stayed with me, because I understood exactly what he meant. People had spent years looking at Alexander as only a powerful man. They saw the reputation, the influence, and the distance he created. They never saw the person behind it. Over the next few days, Alexander and I continued searching through the remaining records. We discovered that Clara had been given responsibility for protecting a piece of information that could affect both families. It was not a financial document. It was not something that could create power. It was a record of a promise. A promise that if either family ever forgot their values, someone would remind them. I stared at the document for a long time. Your family trusted my grandmother with this? I asked. Alexander nodded. They trusted her because she was not interested in power. Those words made me quiet. Because that was the first time I realized why my grandmother had been chosen. She was not important because of her position. She was important because of who she was. For most of my life, I had been judged by things people could see. My appearance, my job, my place in the world. But my grandmother's story reminded me that a person's value was never measured by how others ranked them. That evening, Alexander joined me in the kitchen while I prepared dinner for the household. It was unusual to see him outside his office. The employees noticed too. The man who rarely entered ordinary spaces was standing beside someone they had ignored for years. You seem comfortable here, I said. He looked around the kitchen. Maybe because this feels more honest than most rooms in my world. I smiled. That is a surprising thing to hear from you. He looked at me. I am learning that being powerful does not mean having all the answers. It was the first time he admitted that openly. The first time I saw the weight he carried. Later that night, Alexander showed me another document he had found. It was a record of his father's final decisions before he passed away. There was one note written at the bottom. When the time comes, trust the person who protects people without expecting anything in return. Alexander read the sentence twice. Then he looked at me. I did not know what to say. I had never thought someone like him would describe me that way. Before I returned to my room, Alexander stopped me. Emily. I turned around. Thank you. I smiled slightly. For what? He looked at the documents in his hand. For reminding me that my family's history is not just about what we built. It is about who we became while building it. The next morning, another problem appeared. Someone had attempted to remove the final remaining records from the archive. The documents were not destroyed, but the message was clear. Someone did not want the full truth revealed. Alexander looked at me with a serious expression. We are closer than ever. I held the old necklace in my hand. Then why does it feel like we are just discovering the beginning? Alexander had no answer. But deep down, I knew the same thing. The secret connecting our families was not only about the past. It was about someone who still wanted to control the future. I thought we were searching for someone who wanted to hide the truth. I was wrong. We were searching for someone who believed they were protecting it. After discovering that someone had attempted to remove the final records from the archive, Alexander and I knew the answer was closer than ever. But the more we uncovered, the more complicated the story became. The missing documents were not random. They were connected to a decision made years ago by someone inside the Romano family. Someone who had access, influence, and a reason to keep certain memories buried. Alexander spent the entire morning reviewing every remaining record. I watched him from across the library and noticed something I had never seen before. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. For years, he had carried the responsibility of protecting a family name without knowing the full story behind it. "You do not have to solve everything alone," I said. He looked up at me. "That is what I was taught to do." I understood then. Alexander was not just protecting an empire. He was protecting a version of himself that he had created to survive. The man everyone feared was also a person who had spent years believing that trust was a weakness. But now he was learning something different. Trust was not weakness. It was the reason people were willing to stand beside you when everything became uncertain. Later that day, we discovered a hidden section in the archive. It contained personal letters between my grandmother and Michael Romano. The letters revealed something neither of us expected. Clara Carter had not only protected the promise between our families, she had also protected Alexander. When he was younger, there had been a difficult period after his father's passing. Many people around him wanted him to become colder, more distant, and more focused on control. But Clara had written a letter reminding Michael's family that Alexander needed someone to teach him compassion, not just responsibility. I read the words slowly. A person can inherit an empire and still lose himself. Make sure he remembers that people matter more than power. I looked at Alexander. He was silent. For the first time, I saw how deeply those words affected him. "She knew you," I said. He nodded. Apparently, she understood me better than I understood myself. That moment changed something between us. I was no longer just the maid connected to his past. I was someone who carried a message meant for him. And Alexander was no longer just the man who protected me. He was someone who needed to understand why he had been protected too. That evening, Thomas Reed returned to the mansion. He requested another conversation with Alexander, but this time he asked for me to be present. When we entered the room, Thomas looked different. Not like a powerful advisor, like someone carrying the weight of years of silence. "I owe both of you the truth," he said. He explained that after Michael Romano passed away, he became afraid that the family would lose everything. He believed keeping certain information hidden would prevent conflict. He thought he was protecting the legacy. But over time, the secret became heavier than the truth itself. "I convinced myself I was saving the family," Thomas admitted. "But I was only protecting my fear." Nobody spoke for a moment, because we all understood something important. The biggest mistakes were not always made by people who wanted to cause harm. Sometimes they were made by people who were too afraid to let go of control. Before leaving, Thomas handed Alexander one final envelope. "Your father wanted you to have this when you were ready." Alexander opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Michael Romano. The first sentence immediately changed everything. "If you are reading this, then the person who understands our family's future is standing beside you." Alexander looked at me. I felt my heart become still. The letter continued with one final message. "Do not trust the person with the most power. Trust the person with the strongest character." And in that moment, we both realized the truth. My connection to Alexander's past was never about a hidden name or an old promise. It was about a lesson his family had forgotten. The future of an empire would not be decided by the person who controlled it. It would be decided by the person who truly understood what it meant to protect it. I thought the letter from Alexander's father would bring the story to an end. Instead, it revealed the most important question we had not answered yet. If my grandmother had protected the future of the Romano family, then who was she protecting it from? And why had someone spent so many years trying to keep that promise hidden? Alexander and I spent the next morning reviewing every detail from Michael Romano's letter. The message was clear. The person who carried the strongest character would be the one capable of protecting the future. But there was another part of the letter that caught our attention. Michael had mentioned that the truth would only be complete when 3 people understood the same promise. My grandmother, Alexander, and someone else. Someone who was still connected to the Romano family. We searched through the old records again, looking for any mention of another person involved. Hours passed as pages turned and memories came back to life through handwritten notes. Then I found something. A small reference written at the bottom of one of Clara Carter's letters. It mentioned a woman named Eleanor Blake. Alexander recognized the name immediately. She was my father's closest friend, he said. She helped manage family matters before Thomas took over. I looked at him. Do you think she knows the truth? Alexander nodded slowly. I think she knows more than anyone. We contacted Eleanor that afternoon. She was older now, living quietly outside the city, far away from the world of business and influence. When we arrived, she welcomed us with a calm expression, as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. Her home was simple, nothing like the Romano mansion. There were family photos, books, and small reminders of a peaceful life. It reminded me of my grandmother's home, places where people valued memories more than appearances. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. You have Clara's eyes, she said softly. I did not know how to respond. I had spent years hearing that I looked ordinary. But in that moment, I felt connected to something much bigger than myself. Eleanor explained that my grandmother and Michael Romano had always believed the future could not be built only by powerful people. They believed it needed people who remembered kindness, honesty, and responsibility. That was why Clara had been trusted. Not because she had influence, because she had integrity. Your grandmother once told me something I never forgot, Eleanor said. She said the person who saves a family is not always the person with the highest position. Sometimes it is the person who never stopped caring. I felt emotion rise inside me. Those words sounded exactly like her. Alexander listened quietly. I could tell he was thinking about everything he had believed before. For years, he thought leadership meant carrying every burden alone. But now he was learning that real leadership also meant accepting help and trusting others. Before we left, Eleanor gave Alexander a small box that had belonged to Michael. Inside was another letter. This one was written shortly before his father's final days. Alexander opened it carefully. The message was not about business or power. It was about him. Alexander, never confuse being feared with being respected. Fear disappears when circumstances change. Respect remains because it is built on character. He read the sentence several times. I watched his expression soften. The words reached a part of him that nobody else could reach. On the way back to the city, neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. I spent my entire life protecting what my family built. I looked at him. And now? He looked out the window. Now I think I need to protect what my family was supposed to represent. That was the first time I heard him speak about the future without mentioning power, reputation, or control. He was no longer trying to preserve an empire. He was trying to restore its meaning. But when we returned to the mansion, we found something unexpected waiting for us. A new document had arrived. It contained information about the final person who had benefited from keeping the secret hidden. Alexander read the name and became completely silent. I knew from his expression that this person was not just connected to the past. This person was connected to his present. And whatever happened next would decide whether the truth could finally set both families free. I thought we had finally uncovered every hidden piece of the past. I was wrong. The final document waiting for us at the mansion revealed something neither Alexander nor I expected. It was not the name of an enemy. It was the name of someone who had been protecting the secret for years. Someone who had been close enough to understand the promise, but distant enough to remain unnoticed. The name on the document was Daniel Romano, Alexander's cousin. For several moments, he said nothing. I watched him hold the paper in his hands, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Daniel was not a stranger. He was someone Alexander had grown up with, someone who had shared family memories and understood the pressure of carrying the Romano name. Why would he do this? I asked softly. Alexander looked at the document again. I do not know if he wanted to hide the truth or if he was afraid of what the truth would change. That answer reminded me of something Thomas had said. Sometimes people do not hide things because they want to destroy them. Sometimes they hide things because they are afraid of losing what they know. We spent the next several hours reviewing Daniel's connection to the missing records. What we discovered was complicated. Daniel had not created the original secret. He had inherited the responsibility from people before him. Over time, he became convinced that revealing everything would damage the Romano family forever. He believed protecting the image of the family was the same as protecting the family itself. But he forgot the lesson my grandmother had understood. A family is not protected by hiding its mistakes. It is protected by learning from them. Alexander decided to speak with Daniel personally. I asked if he wanted me there. He looked at me and smiled slightly. I think you should be there. I was surprised. Why? He answered without hesitation. Because this story was never only mine. Those words meant more than he probably realized. The man who once believed every burden belonged on his shoulders was finally accepting that some truths were meant to be shared. When we met Daniel, he looked nothing like the person I imagined. He did not seem arrogant or careless. He seemed tired, like someone who had spent years carrying a decision he could never explain. I knew this day would come, Daniel said. Alexander looked at him calmly. Then why did you wait? Daniel looked down. Because I was afraid. The honesty in his answer changed the atmosphere. He explained that after Michael Romano passed away, many people wanted to change the direction of the family. Some believed the old promises were no longer important. Daniel chose silence because he thought silence would prevent problems. But every year that passed made the secret heavier. Your father believed character mattered more than reputation, Daniel said to Alexander. I forgot that. Alexander listened carefully. Then he asked a question that surprised me. Did you ever believe you were doing the right thing? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. That is what makes it harder to admit I was wrong. I realized something in that moment. The story was not about finding a person to blame. It was about understanding how good intentions could become harmful when people stopped listening. Later, Alexander and I walked through the mansion halls in silence. The place that once felt cold and distant now felt different. The walls still held years of history, but they no longer felt like they were hiding something from us. You changed, I said. Alexander looked at me. So did you. I smiled. I do not think I changed. I think people finally started seeing me clearly. He nodded. I think that is the difference between being noticed and being understood. The next morning, Alexander gathered everyone connected to the family. He was ready to reveal the truth and restore the promise his father and my grandmother had made. But before he could speak, another message arrived. It was from the original archive. The final record had been found. A record that would explain why Clara Carter was chosen in the first place. Alexander opened it carefully. I saw his expression change as he read the first line. Then he looked at me. Emily, this was never about protecting my family. I felt my heart become still. Then what was it about? He looked at the document and answered quietly. It was about protecting yours. I thought the final record would reveal why my grandmother protected the promise between our families. I never expected it to reveal why she had chosen me. Alexander and I stood together in the archive room, holding the last piece of a story that had been hidden for decades. The document was old, carefully preserved, and filled with words written by people who believed the future depended on someone remembering what truly mattered. Alexander read the first lines again. Then he handed the paper to me. My hands felt still as I recognized my grandmother's handwriting. Clara Carter had written about a promise made years before I was born. A promise to protect a family, not because of power or influence, but because every person deserved the chance to be seen for who they truly were. The record explained that after a difficult period in the Romano family, Michael Romano worried that the next generation would forget the values that built everything. He wanted someone outside the world of wealth and control to remind them of something simple. Kindness, honesty, responsibility. That person was Clara. But there was one final part of the record that changed everything. Clara had written that one day her family would meet the person who needed this lesson most. Not the person with the most authority. Not the person with the greatest influence. The person who needed to remember that people mattered more than reputation. I looked at Alexander. He understood before I said anything. My father knew I would lose myself, he whispered. I shook my head gently. No, I think he knew you would find yourself again. For a moment, the powerful man everyone feared disappeared. I saw only Alexander, a person carrying years of expectations, trying to become the person everyone needed him to be. The truth was never that he was weak. The truth was that he had forgotten he was human. After the final record was revealed, Alexander called a meeting with the people connected to the Romano family. He did not speak about protecting an image. He did not speak about maintaining control. He spoke about honesty. He explained what had been hidden and why it was time to stop allowing fear to guide their decisions. The response was not immediate perfection. Some people struggled to accept the truth. Some had spent years believing a different version of the story. But slowly, they began to understand. The foundation of the family was not built on secrets. It was built on the people who had the courage to tell the truth. Later that evening, I returned to the kitchen where I had spent so many mornings working quietly. The same room where I once felt invisible now felt completely different. Alexander walked in and looked around. "You know, everyone here sees you differently now," he said. I smiled. "That is because they know a little more about me." He shook his head. "No, they know a little more about themselves." I thought about that for a moment. He was right. The biggest change was not that people finally discovered my connection to the Romano family. The biggest change was that they learned not to judge someone before knowing their story. Alexander and I continued to work together in the months that followed. The Romano family changed slowly. Decisions were made with more honesty. People were listened to more carefully. The old promise between our families was no longer a hidden responsibility. It became a reminder of what they wanted to become. One morning, I found Alexander looking at the old necklace my grandmother had left me. "Do you still think it was just a family keepsake?" he asked. I smiled. "No, I think it was a reminder." "Of what?" he asked. I looked at him. "That sometimes the people who seem ordinary are the ones carrying the things that matter most." He smiled because he finally understood. The girl who entered his world as a simple maid was never someone who needed saving. She was someone who helped him remember what was worth protecting. And the man who had spent his life building an empire discovered that the strongest foundation was never power. It was trust. Because in the end, the person everyone overlooked became the person who changed his future forever.